Hi, this is JP Morgan, and today's slanted lens lesson, we're out on location here with Robert Harding. We're doing an image for his new book called Death of the Wayang. It's a great image of him with an airplane in the back. We have smoke, we're going to have strobe lights, and the fading sun. Let's see how we combine those three elements to get a nice portrait of him for his new book. They say you shouldn't judge a book by a cover, but every one of us who buys a book spends a few seconds looking at the title and the cover. Not only that, the publishers know that readers also flip the book over and look at the picture of the author. That's why more and more authors and publishers are viewing the author photo as a marketing opportunity. The author photo is just another opportunity to tell a story. Today's photo shoot is for Robert L. Harding. Robert has written a thriller called Death of the Wayang, set in Indonesia, and we wanted to show something strong and action-oriented in the photo. Robert likes planes and is a student pilot. We had an opportunity to shoot at historic Santa Paula Airport, surrounded by a beautiful scenery and a number of vintage aircraft, including the Steerman Biplane, and framed by a gorgeous California sunset. Let's look at how we set up our lighting, combining strobes with a sunset to give us this creative portrait. The challenge is keeping the fading sun balanced with our strobes long enough to give us time to shoot. Let's break the light and exposure process down. The most important light source for this image is going to be the background light, or the sunset. Let's look at how to combine strobes with a changing background or sunset. The sunset changes so fast it doesn't give us enough time to get our photo done, so we need to be prepared to change our exposure every few minutes to give us more time to shoot. Here are our camera settings for the shoot we're going to do this evening. We're using 160 ISO because we want very clean blacks. I set the aperture to accommodate a very nice depth of field because I want to see the airplane clearly in the background. I'm going to use f13. It gives me enough depth of field to see the background. To give me my exposure for the background, I'm going to use the in-camera meter. I'll take a meter reading on the sky. It gives me 1/60th of a second at f13. 1/60th of a second will be my starting point. We'll control the background with this shutter speed. We're going to lengthen it longer and longer as the sun goes down to give us the correct exposure. The strobes will stay the same at f13 because that exposure is constant. We'll just lengthen the shutter speed to accommodate the background as it gets darker. Here's our first image with just the background exposure. The first light we're going to set up is our key light. I'm using a small PhotoFlex octodome with a travel head by Dynalite. Here's our key light balanced with our background. This is our first image. The airplane is way too dark in the background, so we're going to direct a Dynalite strobe head at the front of the airplane. This head has only the reflector on it. I'm going to move it slightly towards the camera so it lights the side of the airplane that we see from the camera side. Here's our shot now with the light on the airplane, much better. We needed to add some fill on his face, so I added a light panel with the white side towards our subject and moved it in to open up his face. Here's our image before we do any manipulation or Photoshop work. This is how it looked the night we shot it. As the sun sets, we're going to add some smoke with a Rosco smoker behind the airplane. This will be very subtle, but it'll be a nice look. This is a beginning point for our shoot tonight. The sun is going to start to set. We're going to be changing our exposure the entire time as we chase the sun as it gets darker and darker. At 6:40, we start at 1/60th of a second. By 6:51, we've dropped to 1/25th of a second. By 7:01, we've dropped to 1/25th of a second. By 7:15, we've dropped to 1/15th of a second. Our sunset's starting to build now. By 7:17, we've dropped to 1/13th of a second. As the sun sets, we're going to add some smoke with a Rosco smoker behind the airplane. This will be very subtle, but it will be a nice look. By 7:23, we've dropped to 1/6th of a second. By 7:25, we've dropped to 1/3 of a second. It really is a strong sunset now. We'll get our best images in this next few minutes. It's pretty much dark at this point. We've shot into longer and longer exposures as the sun is set. You know, with an exposure this long, a really neat exposure technique starts to happen. If I ask my talent to move slightly right or left, it leaves a black line around his head or body. This is created when he moves before the strobe goes off. His body is acting like a mask on the sky, not allowing any exposure in that area. When he moves after the exposure starts, the strobe imprints his body and face out of register with the dark area he created on the sky. This is a fun effect to play with. The longer the exposure, the more interesting this can become. This is the image we're going to take into Nik software to experiment with. I took the image into Nik Color Efex Pro 4. I used a recipe called Black Gold and turned off the levels and curves and the colorized layers. Here's our image after the Nik process and some spotting in Photoshop. I was just curious what would happen if I took the image back into Nik software and ran the black gold recipe one more time. This time I left the levels and the colorization on. I think it's really interesting. There's my take at combining strobes with a setting sun. I hope you enjoyed this portrait and found this process interesting. So keep those cameras rolling and keep on clicking.